All right. We're gonna be coming back. Before we get started with our next speaker, in the beginning of our session, I introduced you to this. We talked about who our institute is named for, our educational endeavors, due to the wonderful efforts of everything he did as a friend and partner of this center. And his son, Harry, is joining us today and wants to say a few words. So between our stipends, our food, the educational materials, being able to bring speakers here, it would not be possible without the generosity of the Wall family. So if you could please, Mr. Harry would like to come up and say a few words to you, if you could please.
Very great work in the past, and Talia, and thank you to the teachers. I mean, it's all about you. We're just, happy to be able to make part of this, all that to happen. I don't know if Steve had mentioned, but my father, his story, and I'll be very brief, but his story is one that lends itself very well because he grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, became at the medical school when there were quotas against Jewish doctors, so his family name was Wallowitz. He changed it to Waltz, and was an Army in the U.S. medical officer in the U.S. Army. How couldn't be a more appropriate time than the anniversary of D-Day to be here. And he was posted actually Palestine. We met my mother, who's a German refugee, and she lost much of her family in the Holocaust. And fortunately, her mother and father had survived, but most of the others were destroyed. And came back to grown up and took over the local hospital, and everything is just going great. From joining the country club and the local clubs, and there are 3 or 4 places. If I could serve the community with medicine, if I could serve my country, something ought to be changed here. And he went about very, very deliberately and over a long period of time to break down those barriers, not just for Jews, but as other minorities came into the community. And that for him, I think much of this was also forged by my mother's and her family's experiences in the Holocaust. We all know where, how it begins, and so for him, it was very important to challenge anti-Semitism and other forms of racism at the beginning, and was quite actually successful in that. Became the chairman of the Anti-Defamation League in his state. Very active in civil rights councils, and in the late 90s moved to Orlando and got to know Tess Weiss, who really started this center. And I remember him coming here and just visiting. He read religiously and would take books out from the center, and eventually became very, very connected with it. So he decided and left, and we decided to support this institution in a way that I think would be very meaningful for him. And I can't think of anything better than and more important than the type of work that you're doing in Holocaust education, which talks about the roots and consequences of prejudice in not just anti-Semitism, but in all forms. Which is very relevant, very important today. I myself am actually on the board of another organization that does Holocaust education for secondary school, actually middle school teachers in the United States and Europe. And so these two happily converge, and would like to see even more so. The more work we can do in this field, the more it's so important. Thank you all for taking out several days of your time, your summertime. I know how much pressures teachers are under, and I really, really appreciate the great work that all of you are doing here. So thank you, Steve, and continue to have a great semester.
See these microphones are gonna work. Pick one that you'd like to use. Pick a microphone that you'd like to use. So we're gonna everyone who's online. Yeah, just to make sure that you have to use it because people won't be able to hear online. So just make sure you talk right into it. So I'd like to introduce our next wonderful biography to read. I was at a meeting, it's called from AHO, which is the Association of Holocaust Organizations, and he was speaking about the Sarajevo Roses. And that was one of the things in the conversation. The conversations that followed have formed into a good friendship. It is a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Mark Gudgel is, I'm going to read the whole thing, a Nebraska-born native. I did not know that. This is but I tell you, he said talks about education having a huge influence on him. His team had a huge influence on him, followed by a master's module in Holocaust education at the University of London. During that time, he held fellowships in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where he would later work for 6 years as a member of the Regional Educational Corps. In the Imperial War Museum, Gudgel also co-founded the Educators Institute of Human Rights with his friend and colleague at the United States Fighter. I have no glasses on right now. So he began his educational doctorate in character education at Regent University, eventually writing his dissertation on how the American secondary teacher TED Talk empowering young people to repair the world in the fall of 2012. And I'm going to kind of go through this, and then also departed again for London, spending 3 months in the University of London as a Fulbright scholar. Upon his return, I'm bored. So honestly, this is a long list of amazing qualifications, and you're going to get one of his books, not his wine book. We're going to get his wine, Think Higher, Feel Deeper. Yeah, I remembered it. So that will be one of the books you're getting in the session, but I would like to offer a warm welcome to Dr. Mark Gudgel. If you want to read the rest, you've got a really nice smile on it.
You don't. You always learn so much about yourself when people do that. It's really an honor to be here. I'm grateful to Steve for inviting me at all, and grateful to the institution for for making space and allowing me to be here with you. Teachers really are my favorite group of people to work. Not because I think you're aware they make great audiences, but because they make a great impact. So thank you for being here. I said I could use whichever one I wanted. I want this one.
We're going to this up here. See if everyone online here is better that way.
All right, thank you. Okay. So I realize, and I just this morning deleted the slide that I had created to introduce this. This one I realize is problematic because it's a room full of people from Florida, and the Nebraskan is going to tell you all about yourselves. And I get how that's not great. I assure you the other one was worse. I had decided to create something that I thought was funny. And my sense of humor is well, I deleted it. So, but before we get into this, about me. I teach full time at the College of St. Mary. Before that, I spent 18 years at a high school English teacher and taught a lot of different courses on the Holocaust. Fortunately, now I have an undergrad course on the Holocaust through literature and film, which is also my area of research, which is why I feel a little qualified to talk to you about what you're doing in Florida, although I'm sure your insights are deeper than mine. I teach in the EDD program, so if anybody's considering getting a doctorate, it's an online program. Happy to talk to you about that. I like to think it's a good program, but on that note, I wanted to share an anecdote with you that happened only a couple of hours ago, because as teachers, I think this will speak to your soul. I got a phone call. So actually, Steve texted and said, I'm going to pick you up in 15 minutes. And I said, well, it's not going to work. I'm running. I run everywhere. But I got back to my hotel room and I'm jumping in the shower. My phone's ringing. It's a New York phone number. And I know a handful of people in New York, but specifically I have a couple of graduate students in New York. And I got really excited because I thought it was Tara, who defended her dissertation last week, calling to tell me that she had succeeded and was now Dr. Tara. And I was so excited to talk to her. And it was a different student and was calling to tell me that my instructions for the assignment were on. Required a phone call. So yeah, I realize the most gratifying profession, and I'll use that here in a moment as a segue into part of what we're going to discuss. But even before that, Steve mentioned I wrote a book about wine. I decided I wanted to speak on both coasts this week. So today I am doing this, and on Sunday I'm speaking at the Napa County Historical Society about the Judgment of Paris, which is something I wrote a book about last year. Wine is an interest of mine. It's nothing we need to dig deeply into today, although we certainly could. I wouldn't mind having a glass, but I think about what teachers do a lot in the same manner about what sommeliers do on Sunday. And blinding wine is a party trick, but I said, there's value to it. Deductive tasting, going, okay, well, based on the body, based on the structure, based on the levels of acidity and the other things that I can deduce from this wine without seeing the label, this is what it probably is, right? And it's hard to do, and I'm not particularly good at it, but at an industry event with 100 people at it, I was asked to blind a wine and got it, and was quite pleased with myself, even more so when they said, cool, you can now have a bottle of it. It was really good. A lot of times it's getting lucky. Right? They label one another once in a while, but they don't come with a label that says this is who I am and where I'm from and what my issues are and what my dad did to me and what my mom does for me, and on and on and on. And so we do an awful lot of deductive, experiential sorts of things with these children. I hope you're not tasting them, but we can do other things, right? Don't sniff the kids. Don't swirl and sniff the children. But there are things that we can do, right? Constantly in the presence of young people. I told you my sense of humor is suspect. There are things that we can do in the presence of young people and with them, and we get to know them and we figure out what is going on. And that's nothing really short of magical, but it's not a party trick. It's an incredibly important part of our job. And so everything I have to share with you is relatively generalized for a fairly large audience. And you're the one who goes back to your classroom and knows your students and can take the things that I share and take what's valuable to you and use it take what's not and discard it. You're the lone person who gets to make those decisions. And I think that's really important. That's your role in this, right? We can provide you with all the books and all the information and everything else we could possibly give you, but you're the person who reaches the child. And so take what's useful, discard what's not, okay? So on that note, we were talking a little bit about, oh, good. Do I need to point this at something, Steve? What? I mean, it did earlier when you didn't want it to, so it should still be able to do it, right? I did. Ah, okay, cool. That's fine. Okay, it's working great. So, I was trying to be really polite when I captioned this slide. What I wanted to write was stupid people say and write stupid things. I'm sure I'm sure you're aware of these things. I'm sure you've seen these headlines, and it's worth pointing out, right? These are really credible sources that they're coming from. If the Atlantic says something that I agree with, I just take it at face value. The same for The Economist and others. But this is nonsense. And it's quantifiably nonsense. I think that's worth noting. So I'd be very happy if you want to shoot me an email at some time. I'll send you. So Steve mentioned I'm a runner. I run with one gentleman in particular who I really like to run with. He inspires the heck out of me. He's 86 years old. He's a Roman Catholic priest, and he's blind. And we run for about 45 minutes at a time. And my role is so that he doesn't get hit by a basketball because we're running laps around basketball courts at the university he teaches at. And he is the one, Father Gillick is his name, who came out in, I think, like 2023. I mean, it's quite recent that The Economist decided that they were going to study this incorrectly and then tell everybody what they incorrectly found out. And so this piece I'd be happy to send to you. It's a little 10-minute podcast, but they just kind of climbed into the numbers. And one of the things about this that's so troublesome, 1 in 5 Americans, the Holocaust is a myth. Like, that's scary. That's horrifying. If it wasn't completely wrong, I would say we should be really disturbed by that. But that's just not true. And so if you, and one of the reasons that we know that, right, is that we know how they came to that conclusion and the methodology they used, and it was deeply flawed. One of the issues, I won't bore you with the whole, I teach a course on qualitative research and it bores me, but they used opt-in surveys. And so in refuting this study, I think it was Pew, went ahead and used the same methodology asking different questions. And what they discovered was that 12% of Americans are licensed to drive a nuclear submarine, which is amazing. And I have a new life goal. And so it's just not true. Reality is more nuanced than that, right? The piece on the right, I think a lot of us have shown tremendous self-restraint. I think an awful lot of people who work in Holocaust education have politely not committed homicide, because this is absurd. And if you read it, and I don't encourage you to, but if you were to read this, you will find almost nothing of substance. And it's disturbing to me that the Atlantic thought this was something they'd publish. I mean, we can share ideas, right? And we can have discourse. But what you see here are just inflammatory headlines. And I don't know if I'm supposed to do this or not. I would expect it from Fox News. Can I do that? Okay. I don't expect it from these sources. And so, you know, what I want to say to you as teachers, what you are doing matters, and what you are doing works. Doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. Of course there is, there always is. But what you are doing is effective. Please keep doing it. And please don't let nonsense like this be a reason to stop or to doubt yourself or to question the efficacy of Holocaust education. We can always be better. That should always be a goal, but this isn't it. Okay, I hit the thing. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you super quick. You can read, and one of my personal policies is I don't read PowerPoint slides to people. So there's information on the screen that you might want. But effectively, this is a study that I conducted in 2023. It's the third study of its kind, and I've spent a significant amount of time reaching out to teachers and collecting survey results on how they teach about the Holocaust. So the samples from Florida come from 37 respondents. I surveyed well over 500 American teachers. And so the results, again, may not reflect your personal practice, but I wanted to start here because, again, I think what you're doing works, and I think this is interesting information. I'm also very happy to share this with you. One of the reasons I am sharing it at all is because no one else has this data, and I haven't published it yet. And I thought, hey, I'm coming to Florida. Somebody might want this, So eventually it'll probably find its way into a book if I can ever get through my summer courses. Okay, so this is, I'm sure, not news, right? But that is a pretty high percentage even nationally. And I think, it corresponds with this next slide. We'll move through these quickly. We have a lot to do today. I clicked it. Okay. That's it. Okay. Now you can parse that out in a number of ways. One thing I didn't write up there, right? But if you look at that very bottom column, and I realized it isn't as in line, the bottom is more than 20 hours. And that corresponds to people who responded that they have an entire class on Holocaust, and that number in Florida is quite significant as well, which I think is pretty interesting. So how many of you have an entire course on the Holocaust? Okay, so that's a small percentage for this room. Very cool, though. I'd love to talk to you about that. But for the rest of us, we're working it in other places, right? And that's going to become part of our conversation today. I'm going to have to start clicking it when I think I'm going to want. Well, and then it went the wrong way. Yeah. This is okay. Is that it? Is that where it's supposed to be? I don't know. Yeah, okay, good. So we've got insufficient time. Great, next slide. Thank you. No, next one. There we go, good. All right, so one of the things I'm really interested in is what films and what books we use to teach about the Holocaust. As an English teacher and someone who did my dissertation looking at the film we use to teach about the Holocaust, that intersection is important to me. And then I also think that you learn an awful lot, or, again, generalizable results, but I think you learn an awful lot when you look at what materials teachers are using. Get a good sense of what people are learning, right? And so, I'm interested in what you deduce from this when you look at these, and if someone wants to enter in the chat, of course, just let me know, please. But for those of you who are present as well, when you look at that list, and that's 5 out of 100 and some options, what do you see? What stands out to you? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Mm. Mhm.
as well. These are probably the most popular ones. I see these all the time. Oh, thank you. Hi. I see these all the time, and none of them are bad. I mean, they have a lot of rich information, and some of them are definitely gory and emotional, but these are so common. There's more than just these. I know all of these, and I do feel like a lot of them have just overlap and similarities, and they don't cover all the stories they need to cover. So seeing this, I'm not surprised, but I wish that there was more diversity in teaching the Holocaust.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That good observations. Does anybody else have one? And I can run the mic to you if you do. Yeah.
Well, none of these on the list make any attempt to give any kind of comprehensive historical treatment to the Holocaust. So you're getting little inserts of knowledge or specific subsets of Holocaust history, but nothing really establishes context.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. In fact, some of them I would argue, and I'm the Diary of Anne Frank is deeply important to me. I think it's an incredible work. It is almost devoid of context. You know, if it's not in the hands of a skilled educator, it's not to do with the Holocaust, right? It's still a powerful book, but it's not about the Holocaust at that point. Anybody else? Tied, sorry. So tied for second place? Yeah, right. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry, but no. Although I'm sure you'll catch some if you look hard enough. So, one of the things there's a lot that we could do with this, a lot, but for the sake of time, we'll move fairly quickly. But one of the things that stands out to me about this list that I like, and again, is me saying I think that you guys are doing something really right down here in a lot of ways, is the absence of certain films that usually break the top 5 in many states, one of those being The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I'm not going to slap anybody upside the head for using that book, okay? And I know that theoretically, like any other text, in the hands of a skilled educator, you might be able to do some great stuff with it. I do think it's a deeply flawed, deeply problematic text, and so I like that it's not being so widely used. In fact, from this, we know it's being used by less than 1 in 5 teachers. It's actually less than 1 in 10 in Florida, I believe. And it was removed. Okay, and again, like it's not Mein Kampf, right? But it is, well, in some ways, I guess, if you don't translate that, but you know, sure. Yeah, sure. You know, and yeah, here you go. Sorry.
It's on my bookshelf, but at the front page, I have this whole long explanation. If you choose to read this book, let me explain to you. And I go through it so they understand.
Terrific. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, I've used it, but I've used it very deliberately to ask my students to dissect it. We've used both the book and, thank you. We've used both the book and the movie to say, hey, will you pull this apart? And I sit down with usually like graduate level students and dig through that and go, okay, what's wrong here? Is this useful for teaching and so forth, and have those sorts of conversations with it. I did hit it, so it might go. Oh, I have to say that to this? Just tell this click. Click. Okay, cool. So looking at the books that you use, this again jumped out at me. And again, I've got a lot more complete data sets that I'm happy to share with you, but also really nobody's seen this yet. And so I thought you'd find it interesting. What stands out to you about this, if anything? Where'd that extra mic go? Oh, good. Yeah, thanks.
Isn't necessarily of import, but my first introduction to mouse was 4 years ago, my husband and I were at like a thrift renegers, like a flea market essentially, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, I read this book when I was little." Like it was his childhood introduction to it, and I had never heard of it before. So interesting to see that he grew up in Maine, I grew up in Michigan, but even down here, I had never seen it, and then a year later.
Very cool. Thank you. Other thoughts on this list, the literature we used? Yeah, take mine.
So I'm not surprised about seeing Anne Frank at night again, but I also want to say that there are teachers at my school right now that like there's a memoir project that some of the A students have to do over the summer, and they're not allowed to use night for the memoir because it's overused. It's like way too popular, and so they're like restricting students from reading that particular book. And then Mouse, I taught it a couple years ago at the middle school, and parents had huge issues with it and objected to it, and I actually was told I couldn't teach it anymore. And the issue they had with it is there's a depiction of suicide and suicidal ideation in it. That was the issue they had with it. Not any of the other stuff, but that. So I'm looking at some of these and I'm like, I see which ones have stood the test of time with popularity. Anne Frank just seems like the most popular go-to, like family-friendly version of the Holocaust. But I do agree with what Mitch said. I don't really think any of these provide like a lot of context, like start to finish. It's all just very personalized stories that don't give you that. I haven't read that one, so I can't speak to it. I'd like to put it on my list since 18% of people think it's cool. That's my thoughts.
Thank you for that. Oh yeah, please. Oh, sure it does. I can parse this out. My teacher, I wanted to put together 5 slides and not 50, but yeah, like if you were interested in me taking the same, literature, but saying what are the literature teachers exclusively teaching? Because this would include any social studies teacher who said they used books, right? So, yeah, so the percentages would absolutely shift. The popularity would not, though, and I know that because I double checked. Yeah, maybe a little bit with some of those that are like 18%, right? Like the ties can move around a little bit, but that's about it. One of the things that jumps out to me about this list is that there's one work of fiction on it. I don't have a, and that's if you don't regard Mouse as a work of fiction, which I don't. It's certainly a graphic novel, and it's but it's all based on Vladek Spiegelman's accounts, and so I think there's, it's probably a different genre, but that's not a statement of, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is, right? If we're not using fiction, that's fine, but I find that sort of interesting. The other thing, just briefly, right, and I suspect that most of you have made this connection. I do quite a bit of writing about it, but we used to, we being the ancient Babylonians and the ancient Assyrians and all the, the very royal distant we, used to burn books because they had to be handmade, right? And so you could conquer a people and burn their library to the ground and eliminate any trace of their existence. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, actually, talking about resistance. In the digital age, banning books is burning books. It's the same intent, right? Just saying you can't read it. And so I have, whenever I speak to students, a read banned book shirt that I like to wear. And then I remind them if somebody tells them they can't read it, it's because it's probably better than the other books and they should read it twice. And one of the reasons I do that is because I've found as a teacher that the people who ban books are not the people who read them. They don't know what's in the book. Someone else told them it was objectionable. My favorite trick to play on students when I taught 9th grade English was we would be reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone because that was part of the curriculum and I thought it was really cool. And invariably, somebody would come to me and say, my mom says I can't read that. Now, this isn't that kid's fault. And so I tried really hard to do as well by that student as I could. But it was so much fun. I go, okay, would you go home and have your mom ask your pastor if you could read The Hobbit instead. And they'd come back the next day and they'd say, yeah, they said The Hobbit's fine. Because J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian. And J.K. Rowling is a deeply flawed, problematic person, but it wasn't about the book. It was about the book. And so we could study this whole character arc in the same way, and the kid could read The Hobbit, which was a little bit longer. They didn't love that. But, they could read the same book and get a lot of the same stuff out of it, but everybody at home was okay with it. It's interesting to me. What did you say was the rationale for banning mouse? Suicide ideation. Yeah, and that's, well, yeah, there are tiny mouse penises in that book. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, they're probably average sized mouse penises. I don't actually have any frame of reference for that, but like, it's nuts. It's nuts. There's all kinds of stuff in that book. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Wow. With like everybody. Yeah. Right. Right. And that you're 100% correct in my opinion. And that's where we get back to the people that ban books are not the people who read them. And that's a huge problem. But again, you're teachers. You're the solution to that huge problem. I clicked. I didn't say click. I'm click. All right. So I just want to share this with you because I think it's interesting and I think it's admirable. Now, number one, time is the number one factor influencing Florida teachers. Also, most teachers teaching about the Holocaust. And then it's current events. And boy, there's a lot going on in the world, right? And so you can bring that into the classroom. Yes, sir. No, I would never seek to put a point on that. As the teacher, you're the one who knows how much time you need to do this effectively. I could have asked, do you have more? Well, I did ask, how much time do you have? Right. So I know how much time they have, but then the question is a matter of opinion. Is that enough for you based on what you've got? So does that answer the question? Yeah. I mean, I would say that's sure. No. I think that has a lot to do with the teacher's interests and skill set and what's in the curriculum. One of the things, I don't know about you, I've been regularly told, teach this, and I know there isn't time to fit that in, Absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely right. A lot of teachers that I've interviewed over time for sure. Yeah, thank you. So what I do see, right, so we talked about current events, but then the other thing, the state mandate, and not every state has a mandate, and most state mandates, the vast majority of state mandates are unfunded, and unfunded mandates are pretty ineffective nationally. But if we were able, are you able to scroll down at all on that? It looks like the slide fell off, or is it kind of blocked by Zoom? There, great, thank you. So, oh, that's a different slide actually. Great, thanks. So I thought it was really interesting as an outsider to your state, because we hear a lot about politics in Florida. Like I hear more about politics in Florida than I do about politics in Iowa, which I can, see from my old classroom. And so I was really interested that state political pressure was so low in this instance. And it's worth pointing out that local and national were even lower. That's not always the case. But according to the respondents in Florida, it was here. So click. Okay, so this was another really profound aha thing for me. And I think is really interesting. Florida, as you well know, right? But you have a a large survivor community, not as large as we want it to be, not as large as it was yesterday, but bigger than it will be tomorrow. You have a tremendous heritage here of, well, quite a history. I guess I don't really need to speak to you to it. But the fact that 95% of the people who took the survey, and again, these are people who are self-identifying as Holocaust or genocide educators in some way. The surveys were distributed, again, not opt-in polling because I wanted the results to be accurate. So, they were sent out, like Steve here sent this out. Many of you probably received it from him, or at least it's possible that you did. Yeah, no, I know you sent it out. I just don't know who you sent it to. But I mean, that's a very high percentage, and it's an exceptionally high percentage in one of the rare places where no other act of genocide breaks the 50% threshold. In fact, not even 40. You're at like 38.5 or something like that on the Armenian genocide. And so I thought that was really interesting. So obviously, between the heritage of the state, the history, your ability, your state mandate, a lot of factors come together. And I really wanted to emphasize this for you because I know there's a lot of noise. I think what's being done in this state, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but I think what's being done in this state is effective. I get the impression that you have a more robust, more vibrant, more involved community of Holocaust educators than most states. And I come from Nebraska, where the data would suggest we are quite akin to you in that way. We don't have nearly the population you do. I think more people live in Orlando than live in Nebraska, but that's actually probably true. How many people live here? Yeah. There might actually be more people at Disneyland right now than live in Nebraska, but world, sorry. Yeah. Comes from outside of my survey as well. And so, for example, I know, I've got a list of Tolly fellows, for example, people who have been involved in Tolly. And I've got, and know which states they're from. And I've got a list of fellows of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and know how many come from each state and things like that. So we can begin to follow the breadcrumbs. I don't think unfunded mandates are making much of an impact. I think funded mandates are. I think the presence of institutions like this one have a lot to do with it. There are places, and I don't ever want to rip on anybody's state, right? But like as Holocaust education goes, if there's anything going on in Mississippi, I can't find it. And again, like I'm not knocking Mississippi; they got other stuff to do too. I wish Holocaust education was robust and effective and efficacious and emphasized everywhere. But there are definitely those states in which there isn't much of a pulse, and then there are states like this one, like New York, like Nebraska, surprisingly to some extent. I mean, living there, I have a bit more, personal insight into what's been done. Where there's a lot going on. South Carolina is impressive. Wyoming, quite surprising to me. And so there are those. And for the sake of time, I'm going to charge on. Would you pull up the next PowerPoint, please? But I'm happy to. I'll give you my card. And I'm happy to discuss the results of the survey or just share insights and other things that I know with you. If it's of interest. So, if you get a friend I'm giving a presentation in Milwaukee here in a couple of weeks, and I'll do something similar for them. So, and Wisconsin's, I don't want to say anybody's doing poorly or, whatever, but Wisconsin's pretty solid. So this is going to be a brief presentation that's going to lead us into some conversations in breakout rooms. And I don't know, do you like that slide? I like the title, and I'll tell you why, but do you like the slide, or is that just cheesy? It's all right? It actually looks kind of like a coyote to me. Oh, yeah, I should put, I'm going to draw pupils in them. No, not on purpose. No. Okay, all right, cool, we'll keep it. So this is part of the presentation I'm going to give in Milwaukee that they asked me to at their Summer Institute. And I use this phrase for a reason. I like this phrase. I should probably write an article sometime. But we have heard, I know you've heard the phrase like sheep to the slaughter. And I think to those of us who work in this realm and have studied this subject, that's offensive. You know, I mean, it's not my family that we're talking about, but I find it deeply offensive because it is my friends. It is people I care about. It's people I've devoted my life to teaching about. And I think important from an educational and pedagogical standpoint, it's completely untrue. And so today I want to talk about different forms of Jewish resistance to the Holocaust. It doesn't mean that we won't look at other forms of resistance as well, but I think it's really important that we delineate when we're teaching about these things between those two, right? Because there are the people who are under attack defending themselves, and then there are others, and some people call them upstanders, and some people call them heroes, and they're, you know, kind of a raft of names, but there are others who stood up on behalf of potential victims and stuck their neck out. And I'm not going to say that one is better than the other, but they are quite different. And if we're teaching about resistance and we're teaching about Jewish resistance, there are a lot of great examples. And if we're teaching about resistance, and someone who responded to my Hova poll, they're going to start using a small light, and I love that. I just took a group of students to Amsterdam to the Anne Frank House and Westerbork concentration camp. And on the flight back, the president of my university texted everybody and went, "Hey, a small light's available." And I think we all watched it on the back of these, you know, seat back things on the flight to Houston. I didn't mean to like roll my eyes at Houston. That's just, if you're flying to Europe, not out of, or be cognizant of what you're doing, right? I don't know if you've ever, we flew from Chicago to Amsterdam and it took 6 hours, right? Now, it takes a little bit longer flying against the grain, but Chicago and Houston are not equidistant from Amsterdam at all. And so it took 6 hours to get there and 11 to get to Houston. And then I still had to, anyway, sorry. That's why I rolled my eyes at Houston. Houston's a lovely place with lovely people. So, at any rate, could we skip to the next slide? Click. I say click? Okay. I didn't, but I meant to. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Okay. So I like this because it gave me the opportunity to talk about two things that I think are extremely important. One of them, right, armed resistance is probably the most common thing for us to bring up and discuss when we're teaching about resistance to the Holocaust, especially if we're focusing on Jewish resistance to the Holocaust, the Nazis, and so forth. And so there are two things here. One, that image is from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, as you can see. It's one of many that we have access to. A lot of people, how many of you teach anything, even a mention of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? Just a few. And that's fine. That's fine. I would say that it's a story that young people, I think, have a real tendency to appreciate. The young man in charge of the ZOB at that time, the resistance organization in Warsaw, Mordecai Onyelewicz was his name, was I think 19 years old. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising lasted for a month, meaning when the Nazis moved in to try to clear out the ghetto, the Jews, without any real weapons, right, mostly handmade, right? We're talking about Molotov cocktails and you know, whatever gun or kitchen knife you could smuggle, right? It's not like they had tanks of their own to fight back with, or air support or anything like that. People who are diseased, emaciated, have been starving. Warsaw is not one of the ghettos that went up and down quickly like Zaget and Night. It's one of the ghettos that was around so long it had a concrete wall around it, right? A brick wall around Warsaw. And so these people had been in here and suffering for a very long time, and they held out longer than the Dutch, longer than the French, And this, again, that's not meant to pick on the French or pick on the Dutch or anything else. It's meant to go, wow, the power of the human spirit is an incredible thing. And I don't think for a second that Anja Lewitz or anyone else fighting back in Warsaw thought that they were going to defeat the Nazis. I think they chose how they were going to die. And I think there's something noble about that too. So when we talk about resistance and we talk about the human spirit, I think there's a lot that young people gravitate to there. Now, I also wanted to point out, because photography and film from this era is an interest of mine, and if you want some other time, I can give you a very preachy lecture on necropornography and why you shouldn't. But for now, we'll put a pin in that. But if you're using images that were taken by perpetrators of any act of genocide, I think that's a really important thing to disclose. Right? It's not an ethical consideration so much as it is an intellectual consideration. Because anytime you're looking at a photograph, right? Every single time I take a picture, right, and then I upload it to Instagram because my daughter is adorable and everyone needs to see her twice a day. My son's kind of cute too. He's less cute. You can see him too if you follow me on Instagram. But I crop those, right? Like the picture, and then I crop it, and then I edit it, and on and on and on and on. Every photographer in the history of photography has done something similar. They decide what's in the frame and what's not, right? You don't know who's standing behind the photographer. You don't know what was said. It's a still, right? And so you could say to somebody, I'm going to need you to smile or I'm going to shoot you, right? And that's a very different photograph. And then you use that photograph to say, look, they were being treated so poorly. They're smiling. Look, they're out of thing. Shut up. So, sorry. But, you know, anytime you're using images taken by the perpetrators of an act of genocide, I think it's really important to disclose that. There's nothing in this image in particular that I'm like thinking, oh, I wonder what's over there. I just think it's an important practice and always good to let people know that. Can we go to the next slide? I failed you. I'm sorry. But don't. Okay, so I wanted you to know that this is here, and I think for the sake of time, we'll roll past it. It's a 2.5-minute video. It's on armed resistance. Feel free to like take a picture of that, or I'm happy we can send out, Steve, or you can put. Do you want to drop that link in the chat or something? I know there are people who want it. There's a lot of, I mean, there are so many great resources out there, but I think in particular, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum does a nice job. Do you mind moving that to the next slide then? Click. Thank you. So I like that image. I didn't know what would happen in PowerPoint if I typed in Nazi, and that was like the first thing that came up, and I was like, cool. But I also think that the thing I actually like most about that image, I think, is that it's less to do with Nazis and more to do with Nazi ideology, right? And that makes it, I think, very contemporary in that sense. But I want to talk about other kinds of resistance beyond the armed resistance that I think a lot of us are pretty familiar with, or may be teaching about. Do you mind then going to the next slide? Okay. So as we think about, and if you didn't read that or didn't catch it, so thinking about, in addition to armed resistance, what other kinds of resistance there be? Yeah. Great. I wasn't here, but what? Yeah. Cool. And yeah, so artistic, I like that phrase actually. I'm wondering if I need to like credit you for that and use it. But I would class that as what I would call intellectual resistance, but I think there's a lot of that. There was a lot of intellectual resistance. I'm going to give you another example here in a minute before we get into groups. Other kinds of resistance? Yeah.
Well, the people that were forced to go through belongings and they would take things that were hidden in clothing and in suitcases, would that be considered a form of resistance? They were taking like money and jewels that were found within the sort of the Jewish people that they were hiding.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you tell me, is that a form of
Well, I
resistance?
would
Are they
say
resisting?
so. I would say so. Yes, I just don't know if you
Yeah.
consider it as one.
Oh, well, your opinion matters every bit as much, more than mine, actually, because you work with students. But yeah, I think so. I agree with you that that is a form of resistance, definitely. Yes, please.
Wouldn't smuggling be a form of resistance? So smuggling things into camp, smuggling people or goods out of camp, hiding people, faking IDs or passports for them so they can be safe. I would feel like that's a pretty big form of resistance.
Yeah, I would say so too, and I think maybe we need to, I think I need to rethink how I class some of these things, because I'm a little proud of myself, because people used to talk about just spiritual resistance, and I've said spiritual and intellectual resistance are different, and have been making that case. But I think that what many of you are discussing is a realm of resistance, right? It's not necessarily armed. We're not fighting, but certainly that is, that resistance is active. It's not. Yes. Go ahead. I love that. I love that. And on that note, one of the things that we sometimes talk about is that survival is an act of resistance. Right? You're supposed to be dead. We're trying to kill you all, and you made it. I think the very act of surviving, of not succumbing, was resistance as well. Yes.
Yesterday we talked about education as resistance, like the education in the ghettos and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's a great example. How many of you used Schindler's List? Schindler's List? Oh, that explains so much to me, because that film is wildly popular in a lot of other places. In fact, it really surprised me when I learned how much it's used. And I say this a lot. I do a lot of writing about that. I'm giving a talk at my alma mater about Schindler's List in London here soon. And it's not, well, you can't use it, so you don't care if it's good or not. If you've seen it, it's interesting. It's not very accurate. And one of the things that's not accurate about it that's really annoying is that they wrote Emily Schindler completely out of the script. They just make her this helpless, naive sort of waif. And the reality is Emily Schindler was by her husband's side the entire time and had every bit as much to do, if not more, with saving those Jews as he did. If you go to Yad Vashem in the Garden of the Righteous, it's not Oscar's tree. It's Emily and Oscar's growing there. And if you're interested in that subject, just real quick, there's a great book called Where Light and Shadow Meet. I'm happy to give that to you another time. You email me or Steve can, whatever. But Where Light and Shadow Meet is Emily Schindler's memoir. It's short. She wrote it after Schindler's List was released, and it is gobsmacking. it's fantastic. I mean, well, anyway, we'll stop there. There's actually, you're going to get my book, I think, which I hate the cover of this book. It looks like a self-help book. One of the things that you'll find out when you start publishing is that there are a lot of things you don't have any control over. Like whether or not your Ivy League publisher spells the name of your famous historian who wrote the foreword correctly on the cover of it. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I want to talk about a cool, I think, example. I want to use my hands, Steve. All right. How's this? Do I look professorish? Sorry. So what I'm going to share with you comes from my book, but it's not something I wrote. It's something I borrowed from someone I met at the museum years and years ago. Her name is Ruth Sender, and she wrote a book called The Cage. She actually wrote another really interesting book. I don't think we spend nearly enough time talking about life after the Holocaust. I'm sure if you've read, for example, Night, which it seems most of you have, I mean, it ends quite abruptly in 1945. Of course, The Diary of Anne Frank ends quite abruptly in a different fashion. But a lot of the stories that we utilize and rely upon to teach about the Holocaust sort of stop in 1945. And I think that most of us have enough experience with it that we know the Holocaust didn't stop in 1945, simply because the Germans no longer had the ability to murder you because you were Jewish didn't mean everything was okay again. So Ruth Sender, also Primo Levi and a number of others, wrote a book about life after the Holocaust, and hers is called L'Chaim, and it's these are written for about an 8th grade level. They're meaningful to those of us who read above that level, but they can be used with pretty young people. Primo Levi's is called The Reawakening, and it's not nearly as accessible, but I think you would enjoy it. You might not enjoy trying to teach with it, but yeah, good stuff, huh? Okay, so this comes from Ruth Sender's The Cage, and it's a brief excerpt I want to share with you, but what they had done, to give you just a little bit of context, is they had assembled a library of Jewish literature in the Łódź ghetto. Depending on who you spend time with, some people say Lodz. That's the Polish U, so it's the Łódź ghetto, but so I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, right? Some people say Lodz. Yeah. So in the Łódź ghetto, they assembled a library, a really pretty sizable one, of Jewish literature specifically, and there are a number of passages in the book about it, but I just want to share this one with you quickly. For 5 years, we have fought for survival and dignity, living like human beings in spite of the savagery around us. I look at the closed curtains that hide the books, the source of our strength. They nourished our minds even while our bodies were withering. They helped us believe in a better tomorrow. What do we do with them? What will happen to the books now? As if reading my thoughts, Moishel says, Riva, the books will survive. Knowledge cannot be killed. Look at these books. We have kept them from perishing in the flames for 5 years. They have kept us from perishing morally. They will survive. You are right, my dear brother. Ideas cannot be killed. The books carry the beautiful ideas of freedom, justice, brotherhood. The Nazis may destroy the books, but the wonderful ideas for a better world will survive. We'll let the books stay right here, on hidden shelves in an empty ghetto, to remind the Nazis of the spirit they could not destroy. I love that passage. I think there's a lot in it, and I imagine if we were to put it on the screen and dissect it, we'd find things I haven't even noticed and things that you appreciate. And certainly you can track that book down easily enough, and it's that excerpt that I just read to you is in the book that Steve's going to give you. I think that is my favorite example, the library in Łódź, and also the way that Ruth, whose name was Riva, Ruth was an Americanization, Rivkel actually, the way she writes about it, I think it's my favorite act of what I think of as intellectual resistance, because you don't, it doesn't have to be, well, anyway, I could go on. I'm going to stop though. You had something to say.
The resistance, because even in that excerpt that you just said, it was definitely tied in with the spirit. And so the knowledge and the truth, the thread of that which is true, is part of the essence of the human spirit. And so I would be careful and especially depending on the age group, right, of making that concrete. Well, this is intellect because it's a book, versus like the spirit of the person that gets translated into the written form. Are you following where I'm going?
That's a really good point. And I think that what I want to suggest is just different ways of going about. I don't think it's important to compartmentalize them beyond the idea of moving beyond thinking of resistance simply as armed resistance. We can teach about that, but I think we so often do. And I think we miss sometimes the opportunity to talk about those many other things, not least simply surviving, that is an act of resistance.
Well, I wanted to respond to that too, in that if we don't try to categorize what type of resistance we're talking about, we can actually look at the motive of the resistor and their mode of action. So I think of a graphic organizer with two axes, and one of them is active and the other is passive. So like survival is not dying. And you could think of, I mean, I know there's a lot of work that goes into survival, but the act of surviving would be passive. The act of fighting would be active, but also then direct and indirect. You know, direct resistance would be something you do against the enemy. Indirect would be something you do to nurture, be something like keeping a diary or smuggling food or something like that. But what it does when you, and just about anything you can think of that would be resistance, you could say, okay, well, it fits here somewhere. And you can use that to help students to identify what possible types of things could be resistance. And I did that with students simply because I was offended by the idea that Jewish victims went like sheep to the slaughter, which means that they didn't fight back, but we would have. So they weren't human like we are. So I say, okay, well, what is it then that you could do in any circumstance, given what you knew, given what resources you had, given who was depending on you, what your age, all that kind of stuff. And when you start thinking about that, you start realizing, hey, they fought back every way they could. In every circumstance, they were resisting. Even when they knew they were going to die, they still resisted because they chose the way they would die, with having empathy for their family and things like that. So it's just a way of broadening the concept of resistance while humanizing the resistor. That's what I think.
I appreciate that. Really good thoughts. I want to go back to something I said in the beginning, that you're all going to take information. I hope you find something of value in this 2 hours. I don't want to waste your time, you know, but I do think it'll be different things. When I was I coached college basketball and other levels for a very long time. And we would go to the Final Four every year, and it's a big, you know, coaching conference basically. And so all the famous coaches are there, and they'd give talks and they'd share drills, and obviously they're not giving away anything they don't want to, but they'd give away all kinds of stuff that we thought was pretty amazing. But our goal in attending these things, every time I'd say, I want to leave with one thing that I'm actually going to use. I don't care if it's an inbounds play or a drill or just, you know, Gino Oriyama said one time, he said, don't do it until you get it right. Do it until you can't get it wrong. And my 7-year-old will say that over and over now. It's one of my favorite mantras, you know. And so we're all going to take different things from this. I hope you take something from this that you will actually be able to utilize in your classroom. And I know it's going to be different because you're in different settings. And that goes back to the, you know, your students. You're the one with the access to them. You're the one with the context piece. No. I didn't take any offense at all. I didn't mean to cut you off either. Forgive me. I can't not say this. I've been thinking it for an hour and 15 minutes. My wife has that shirt. Sorry. Yeah, it's very nice. Oh, is it? Yeah, I see. I didn't know. Thinking about resistance, and in a minute I'm going to have, so those online will be put into breakout sessions or rooms, you know, and here I'm just going to maybe work with a few people around you, or if you need to stretch your legs, you want to get up and go work with somebody at a different table, you could do that, okay? But let's use these, if we can, as a bit of a framework in thinking about teaching about resistance. You know, one of the questions, I think I heard Steve allude to this earlier. One of the things that we really emphasized when I worked at the Holocaust Museum and teacher training, the one in Washington, I mean, we're in a Holocaust Museum, was not to romanticize history and to try really hard not to be sort of disproportionate. I think one of the mistakes, one of the problems I see with using Schindler's List if that is, as one teacher, Bill Younglove in California put it, he said, if I never use that movie because it would take up 4% of the school year. And I went, fair enough. That's a good chunk of time, isn't it? So if we're going to just talk about rescue, man, are we going to send young people out the door with the idea that there were a whole lot of rescuers out there? Because I'll tell you what, if there were, we wouldn't have this to talk about. If everybody living during that era was heroic, if even a large percentage of the people living during that era was self-sacrificing and heroic, there'd be no Holocaust to talk about. Those people are quite novel, and that's why we talk about them. And in the same breath, I'm going to say we need to try really hard not to send the message that everybody was like that. Right. And so when we think about the rationale for teaching about resistance, that's one of my favorite aspects of thinking about resistance beyond the armed, because armed resistance was similar to that heroism that we've seen others display. It wasn't that common because access to weaponry wasn't that common. The ability to fight back. And those of you who teach young people, it's amazing, right? This is in my book, but the number of times I've heard someone say, well, if the Gestapo came to my door, I'd just pull out a gun. Number one, please don't answer your front door with a gun in your hand. What are you doing? But secondly, no, you would not, right? And we need to say that in such a way that doesn't completely shut the kid down, but no. You would not. And so, I think when we think resistance, it opened the idea that there was a lot of resistance taking place. Is that internet okay? We good? Okay, great. So then, as you look through these other questions, how does it fit into the bigger picture? What are the examples we choose and why? I wanted to write, if I'm about any aspect, right? There's this, I hate the word other, I really do. It's just as divisive as the word they. And so we talk about other victims and other genocides, and there's this secondary book by Ina Friedman called The Other Victims. And we can dicker about the language another time. But the Holocaust is a singularly Jewish event in which certainly many, many, many other groups of people were targeted. And again, it's hard to talk about it without using that word, right? But if you've got 5 days or fewer to teach about the Holocaust, and you're devoting, that makes one day 20% of what you're doing. So if you're devoting one day to rescue, that's dramatically disproportionate to what happened, right? If you're devoting one day to homosexual victims of the Nazis, that's an important topic. Absolutely is. But to devote 20% of your time to it is disproportionate. Now, you can say, I'm okay with being disproportionate. I have a rationale for doing this. And I think that's just fine. But again, that comes back to the question of rationale. And I think that's something we must always be asking ourselves. Why am I choosing the materials I'm choosing? Why am I emphasizing the things that I am? Because no matter how much time, I used to give a whole lot of talks on the history of the Holocaust. And what I learned was that if you wouldn't give me 2.5 hours, I would just say no. 2.5 hours is nowhere near enough, as I'm sure you all know. But when people would call and be like, hey, we're gonna have this conference, could you do the history of the Holocaust in 60 minutes? No, just no. I'm sorry, it's not that I don't want to help, it's that I don't think it can be done well. And then, what do you want your students to know about it? So would you move to the next slide, please? Click. I'll humor you. Okay. Yeah. I just forget. All right, so what I'd like you to do, I said with a partner, but man, these are big groups. And if you want to get up, let's put a time on it so that you could use this time to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, and also do this, okay? Just please don't forget to do this. And so I'll do some time here in a minute. But I'd like you to get together and thinking kind of that matrix you were talking about, and you can totally move outside these parameters. Some people were coming up with great examples that I hadn't even thought of. But I'm interested, we've got this room full of experience and knowledge, and you've all read things I haven't. You've all seen things I haven't and know things I hadn't. I saw A Small Light just recently, mind-blowing if you haven't seen it. It's about meat and young geese and the Frank family, and it's just extraordinary, truly extraordinary. So if you would sort of, we could simplify what's asked up here. I'll leave that up there for you, or I won't click. I didn't say. So I'll leave that up there for you. But what I'd really like you to think about doing is thinking about the resources that are available to you so that we collectively can share them with one another. And so if you've got a great story about, Danish resistance, right? Well, that would fall into the category of non-Jewish. But the Danes, right, who sort of famously put Jews on fishing boats, Number of the Stars is about this, and sent them across to a neutral country. If you've got great resources on that, let's make sure everybody leaves this room with those great resources. So let's take 15 minutes. Is that too much? Yeah, I did, but yeah. So if you can hear me, those of you, I hope you can hear me online. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're going to be put into a breakout room, and we're going to go until, why don't we reconvene at 1:35? So that's just a little less than 15 minutes. Well, not according to my watch. My bad. 2:35, sorry about that. Well, people around you work through these questions and come up, please, with examples that we can kind of share out so that we can leave here with resources from our colleagues, okay? I'll see you all at 2:35. Thanks. Probably in Arabic. Oh, it's possible I mistyped. Oh, really? I'm sure I just mistyped that. Forgive me. I am so sorry. Yeah, thank you. I think that might have been on its way out.
this also, it will work for you.
Thank you. May I interrupt you for just 1 second? I'm so sorry. I was just thinking with Mr. Pointer about the best way to make sure that these ideas that you're coming up with are available to you in the future. So whether you're online or in person, will you, once you've kind of solidified what you're talking about, would you put them in the chat? Because we aren't going to have time to talk about them all. We'll share some examples out loud, but if you'll put them in the chat, then everybody will have access to them in the future. Thank you. Folks, we'll reconvene in about 2 minutes, okay? Wrap it up in about 2 minutes. Okay, let's transition here. So before we get going on talking about sharing out some of these examples that you've been writing about, I know you can hear me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm speaking out loud or just thinking, but not when I have a microphone in my hand. Like that's when I know. I'm like, no, I can hear it. So I'm really interested in your thoughts, but before, and the things that you've shared, but before we do that, I want to take a minute to do a couple of things that I just absolutely can't miss before.
¿Tú le diste comida?
That's fantastic.
Everybody online, do me a favor and please mute your microphones.
Muzzle your dog.
The cute puppy. That was funny. Y'all missed it online.
Oh my goodness, that was great. So the first thing I want to do, and not just because of that, but would you join me please in thanking Steve for everything that he's doing? I have done a lot of the kind of work that Steve is doing at this conference, and it's exhausting. It's probably the only thing I know of that's as tiring as teaching, and it's not quite as rewarding. It's rewarding and it's meaningful, not quite as. Also, could we thank all of the people who volunteered and who work here, and in particular Harry for being here? One of the reasons that I don't know how this is going to land, but I'm going to say it anyway. I wasn't like really jazzed about Orlando in June. You know, I'm okay, cool. Yeah, we're all on the same page. All right. So yeah, and so what that makes what I was going to say next even dumber. But I'll be back next month. But one of the reasons I was really jazzed to come to this institute is because I had a similar experience to this very, very early in my teaching career that proved to be completely transformative, and probably the reason that I came to identify as a Holocaust educator in my classes. And that was attending a conference in Washington, D.C. at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum way before I worked there. It's called Belfer. Belfer is still a thing, kind of. It's online now. I consider that unfortunate. I don't think it's the same experience, but I bring it up because I would encourage you still to consider participating in Belfer at some point if you haven't already, because I do think it's neat. They have tremendous resources to share and greater reach than any other institution I'm aware of. But the fact that you get to be here with one another in the same room is really meaningful, I think. And I hope that you won't leave without exchanging email and phone and things like that, especially with the people you've spent time with, people you've got to know. I hope you'll go to dinner with some of these people, from time to time. I'm not suggesting a dating service or anything, but, I really do think you should spend time with each other. The people I met at Belfer, the people I met in those fellowships are a huge part of how everything came together and provided me with tremendous opportunities. As Steve was reading through my resume earlier, he mentioned fellowships that I'd done and the Fulbright and things like that. And those are amazing experiences, but they're not unique to me. They're things that you could do as well. And a lot of the reason that those came to fruition for me was from some of the contacts that I was making, all along the way. And so I really hope you'll keep in touch with one another. I know that Steve would like you to, yes? Sorry?
And just so everyone knows, I know some of you already know this, but we actually have a Facebook group. It's Florida Holocaust Educators, where a lot of our participants this is how I share a lot of our information. People are able to share ideas, lessons. It is a private group. You actually have to answer a little questionnaire, but it's just for people who have attended this conference, and that way when HUVA is gone and you're not able to exchange these, HUVA will stay active for 3 months, so you can still access all of this for 3 more months. But we keep the Facebook group open and live all the time for engagement. So we have about 65 people on there right now. Would love to grow it with anybody new. I don't spam people, but would love for you to join.
Yeah, thanks. And that's exactly, I hope you will. I hope you will. And feel free, please. I try hard not to be on Facebook. I let my Instagram post to my Facebook, so technically I have one, but please keep in touch with me. If you're applying for a Fulbright and want advice about your application, or if you're, anything I can do to be helpful, I'd be happy to do that. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. I'll have you share out some examples. Do you still have a mic back there? Great. So we can pass the mic around a little bit, share out some of the examples, things that you talked about in your group. It's okay to chase a squirrel if it's a good one and you can catch it. So we'll kind of wrap that way.
So I teach U.S. history, so we don't spend a lot of time on it just because we talk about it in the context of World War II, but not really, spend too much time on it. So we were thinking about the educational resistance and kind of equating it back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights when we talk about that with the UN. So that's where we kind of started our focus on the educational resistance, especially in the Warsaw Ghetto and the Vilna Ghetto, like we learned about yesterday. So
that's terrific. Thank you. And thanks for bringing up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because I think that's something that young people get really interested in when you introduce them to it. Oh, so I'll bet I can beat you there.
Well, I work at a Catholic school, and one of the stories that we had, the three of us work at a Catholic school, and Father St. Maximilian Kolbe, and when he took the place, but then how they would pray together, and they were put in a pit there, and every time the guards would come, they would be on their knees praying, and so as an example of spiritual resistance, I thought that was one of the good examples of spiritual resistance. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great example. And interestingly, because I've studied Kolbe a little bit, not one that I had thought of. So thank you very much, because I think it's an important one. It's really fascinating. What else? And if someone puts something in the chat and you want to share that too, please.
So I think you guys said over there, but the Warsaw Ghetto being the armed resistance. And so she and I teach 5th grade. I don't teach this book, but I happen to like this author, and I do like the book Resistance by Jennifer Nielsen, which is the Warsaw Ghetto. And she's got another book called Rescue, which is the other side of the Warsaw Ghetto, and it's happening at the same time. So yeah, she's a good historical fiction author. I'm fifth grade. I can't teach it. I've got to teach it like here. So just a thought.
Is that in the chat? Awesome, yeah. So that's available in the chat as well. Jennifer Nielsen was the name, if anybody didn't hear it. I'm really glad you bring that up, actually. I was going to share this today. We have it. If you want it, I can give it to you. But I was asked a month ago to give a talk to fifth graders about the Holocaust. And I wanted to say no, but they had read Number of the Stars. And yeah, and so I went, okay, but it really challenged me as someone who taught mostly high school and now mostly doctoral candidates to think about how am I going to communicate this information. And I think that goes back, and it's not, it's not dumbing it down. It's upping my level of communication. My friend, a friend of mine who worked at the Holocaust Museum used to say, if you want to become a better teacher, become a better teacher of the Holocaust. And I think that's I think that's profound, because this, to me, as passionate as many of us are about it, is one of the most difficult things to try to teach. And we've scratched the surface on that a little bit, and as to why that is. This is complicated. So I had to really think, I'm not qualified to teach fifth graders anything, so I had to really think about, like, what am I going to say to this group? And anyway, we could talk more about that, but I think as we think back on that analogy from earlier about, the kids not coming with labels, I think that's a huge part of what it is that we're doing. It's funny, I got to find a better way to say that, because kids do get labeled, right? They get labeled all the time, and not positively, but they don't come with instructions. That's been done. I don't know. If somebody comes up with a better way to say it, let me know. But they don't, right? We don't know them. We have to dig into them and learn about that context and figure out who they are. And thank you. I'm really glad that worked for you. It works for me, but I'm really glad that worked for you. Thanks. What else? What else did people put down as resources or acts of resistance that we might need to be bringing up?
The people that wrote anything in the chat seem to, just as the rest of us, focus on all the brilliant materials we've been provided this week alone. So although there are some outside stuff, I think all of us are collectively very excited to use specifically the things that we've gotten to learn about here.
That's really great. Cool. Nice. So now everybody knows the secret. Are there others? I don't want to cut anybody off. Yeah.
Well, we talked about a publication called Recipes from Auschwitz, which was about prisoners who talked about their home and their mothers and the recipes and how they prepared food. And they actually, to the best of their ability at that point, not only staved off hunger by talking about food, which seems a little counterintuitive, but it worked for them, but it also kept alive their connection to family and to their memories of the past, and gave them something to focus on for the future. And it was in a situation where they really didn't have any resources to, do art or anything like that, like we sometimes see about with cultural spiritual resistance, but just the act of speaking and sharing with one another these common memories of home and mother and life gave them strength to put one foot in front of another for another day. So I thought that was a profound thing of resistance. Fanny brought that up. We really were, it was a good thing to talk about.
Absolutely. I want to I want to wrap this and then maybe leave time for a little bit of question and answer, or if, anybody's chomping at the bit to be outside. Can't imagine why, but No, don't be. I ran this incredible race. If anybody a runner, otherwise I won't waste your time. Runner? Okay. I ran this incredible race last year on the Diné Reservation, the Navajo Reservation. No. No. I run in 6mm heel drop, which is less than some, but no. But it was called the Quad Kia, and we started each day with a Diné hoop dance or something along those lines. There was a lot of prayer and a lot in Navajo, teaching us some words in Navajo, which was kind of amazing. But then there were a couple hundred people doing this thing, and we'd run Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We ran a marathon in each of the 4 states that the Four Corners connect at that place, which is on the reservation. It was really incredible. Gave me a lot of time to think. Single track, 7,000 feet of elevation. They didn't go by quickly, and I love to think while I run, but it's interesting how much of my time is still to this day occupied by the Holocaust. And I suspect that that's a relatable sentiment to many of you, maybe all of you. It's really nice that they offer a stipend, but I know that's not why you're here. Like, that's not a good hourly wage, right? It's still great that they offer it, absolutely. I'm not trying to diminish that in any way, but it's not a good, you could be lifeguarding right now and make more money. That's not why you're here. I'm really glad you're here. And I think that the, politics aside, there's an awful lot happening in the world today. And you, as teachers, are our last greatest hope. You are what stands between us. I used to tell my grad students, and I mean this sincerely, within one generation of teachers deciding to go make more money doing less work, Atlas shrugs. The world comes crashing to the ground and shatters irreparably into millions of pieces. You are nothing short of what holds the whole thing together. And I know that it's a difficult job. I left it, and I'm not, that's something I wrestle with a lot. I won't pretend for, I'm credentialed as a sommelier, but I don't work as one, so I don't call myself one. Well, I still have a teaching certificate, and I taught for 18 years, but I'm a college professor, and that's a different gig. And frankly, it's not as hard. I'm not doing what you do, so I don't have the audacity to call myself a teacher anymore. I would be honored to know that I've taught you something, but you're the teachers. And there's genuine heroism in that. There's a lot going on in the world, and you're the ones that get to reach young people. You're the resistance. And I think that that is nothing short of noble. I hope you're proud of it. I hope you feel good about it. I hope you save those emails from students that say, hey, I really appreciate that. You can delete the ones that say, I didn't understand your instructions. But hang on to the other stuff and know that what you're doing matters. And circling back to where we began, it works. What you're doing is effective and important. And I want to thank you for doing it. At this point, there's more that we could do, but I'd like to put a pin in it. If there is anything, I've worked in this field. I worked in Rwanda for 7 years, 6 years, I don't know, it was a while. But I've done those fellowships and things that Steve mentioned, and I've written about this and I've studied it. So if there are any questions that you think I might be able to answer, or if there is any help that I might be able to provide you with, we'll end with that, just some Q&A, and then I'm sure you'll have instructions of some kind from the boss. Although he's not here, so you probably just sneak out now. Yeah.
You don't have to like answer it right now if you need time to like think about it and compose it.
I love a good premise. Go on.
Sorry. But I mean, you've been showing us the data and asking us these questions, so I feel it's only fair to turn it on to you, because I mean, I am genuinely curious from someone experienced. If you had what I've been given in the past, which is one class period, so 50 minutes to teach about the Holocaust, and assume your students know nothing at all, like some of them don't even know what the Holocaust is, how would you approach it? What resources would you use? What would be your end goal that would help you kind of backwards design that lesson? Because I think everybody does it differently, and there's different ways to do it justice, and there's plenty of ways not to do it justice. So I'd be interested to see what you would do if you were like me and you only got a 50-minute session and that was it. You know? But again, you don't have to answer that now.
I'm quite happy to answer that now.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you. My second answer to that question would be that I would rely heavily upon a film put out by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2015, I think, called The Path to Nazi Genocide. It's a 42-minute documentary, and it's the best context that I've seen for the Holocaust in a short amount of time. It answers a lot of questions like what led up to it and what happened afterwards and how did the Nazis come to power and things like that. And I think that there are a lot of study guides out there, but I think you could watch it and create your own very effectively. And that would help you get to some of your own objectives. And if you only had one day, maybe you could assign a little homework answer. But my first answer, which I think is a better answer, not that you can't use the film, is that I would think long and hard about who I knew my students to be. You may have a room full of Cuban immigrants. You may have a room full of really rich, privileged kids. You may have a room with 30 different kids who have 30 different backgrounds, right? And you probably do, right? You might not be able to paint with a broad brush at all. I would think long and hard about who my students were and what they're going to find interesting, and I would and how they like to learn, right? What I've done with them in the past that's been effective, and I would work really, really hard to plant the seed that someone planted in each of us that made us want to know more, that made us go read another book that wasn't assigned to us, that made us, watch a certain film or bring it up at the dinner table. I tell this story in my book, but when I first started studying the Holocaust, I had a series of first dates that never led to second dates because I couldn't stop talking about genocide at the dinner table. And I, looking back on it, don't really wonder why none of those worked out. But I would try really hard to make them want more information. And maybe that's the tie to the local history, right? I think for a lot of us, there's that sort of long ago and far away and documented in black and white feel to it. But as we've been talking about resistance, there are an awful lot of people alive and well today, and I would venture to guess in this room, I know of at least one, who are unto themselves evidence of resistance. The birth rate among Jewish people was quite high in the late 40s and 50s. And some of that I like to interpret maybe a little poetically, right? As this is a group of people who was targeted for complete annihilation, and a great deal of that annihilation took place. And from that came a spring of life. From that came a population of people. And some of those people referred to as second generation speak and quite well on behalf of their parents or tell those stories. But I think there's a tremendous amount of local interest in the Holocaust, and a lot of resources available to you here, yes, but in people and their stories which have been written and so on, and that might be one way into it. But again, you know your students far better than probably anybody else, probably better than their parents. So I would figure out what you think is going to work and go there. And I think you can do that in a day and have them reading stuff long after. One of my favorite things as a literature teacher would be kids who'd come in and say, "Can I borrow that book?" And I hadn't assigned it. They just saw a mouse sitting on the shelf. They just saw the Diary of Anne Frank on the shelf, whatever it was, and wanted to read that. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else?
The difference between like the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism, but I'm thinking about the word Holocaust and historically as a sacrifice, right? And so then maybe the imagery associated with that, and then your question about like changing the language, so like wolves to war versus a sheep to slaughter, which is, you know, biblical, right? So I guess my curiosity is how things got named the way that they got named, and the imagery that came out of it, and who would have been, you probably can't identify the one who, but how that gets named in that way, or the imagery associated. Is my question clear? Kind of.
Ish.
Okay.
So I'll provide an answer, and if I don't answer the actual question, you'll let me know. Okay. I think you may know the word Holocaust is from Greek and means burnt offering. The person who is credited with first using that is Elie Wiesel. He's also the reason that my book looks like a self-help book, I'm not blaming Elie Wiesel for it, but the phrase think higher, feel deeper is, so what had happened was I used to take my students to meet Professor Wiesel in New York City every year. He and I had known one another and wrote letters to each other, and I have one he sent me on my birthday many, many years ago hanging in my office, but he invited me to come here and give a talk at the 92nd Street Y. And I said, great, could I bring some students? And he said, sure, how many? And I said, I don't know, like 5. And he's like, yeah, no problem. He didn't speak like that. Of course, you've probably heard him, you know. And so I went to class the next day and I said, okay, kind of a last minute thing, but I'm going to go to New York here in, I don't know what it is, March, April. He used to give 2 lectures a year at the 92nd Street Y. And Professor Wiesel said I could take some students. Who wants to go? Every hand went up, all 25 of them. So I said, did I say 20? Did I say 5? I meant 25. And him being who he was, he said, no problem, bring them. And that started an annual tradition that lasted for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And so we'd go every year, and we'd go into this little antechamber off to the left when you entered the 92nd Street Y, and he'd come in and speak to just my students, and then we would attend his public lecture. It was the most incredible experience for me, and really for them too. But I was just kind of always gobsmacked that this was even a thing that could happen, you know. And he'd come in and he'd make them feel like he had flown across the country to see them. You know, what do you want to know? You know, ask me anything. And he'd talk to them and they'd ask him questions. And one day as we were leaving, he'd always come say bye to me before he'd go give his talk. And one day we're leaving, he came up and he shook my hand and he said, from one teacher to another, thank you. And I mean, it would you know, that really, really hit me. And it was on the flight home that I thought of this question I wanted to ask. And of course I could have asked any time, but I decided I was going to wait a year and ask him the next time I was with him. And so we are out there a year later. We've gone to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, and we've gone to the Statue of Liberty and the 9/11, which of course, memorial, which of course at that time was not a museum, and the Liberty Tower wasn't built yet. It was huge holes in the ground really for a while, and then other things. And it was a really powerful trip. And we were ending it with Professor Wiesel. And I went up to him and I got to finally ask my question at the end. And I said, as a teacher, what advice do you have for me? And you can hear his voice. I won't imitate it, right? I couldn't possibly do it justice, but I think you can probably hear his voice. And he said, think higher, feel deeper. I won't do it. But he dropped the mic, you know, and he walked out. And that was the last thing he ever said to me. I was sitting in a tasting room in the Napa Valley when I got a series of push notifications, right? Which is a heck of a way to find something like that out. But I think it's extraordinary advice. And it's not easy to take because it's sort of lofty. But I think if you give it some thought and apply it to what you do, well, it made me better. Okay. Do I have to let him go? I must let you go. Thank you so much for your time. It's really my honor to be here and work with you, and please keep in touch. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We're gonna wrap things up for today. If you have any questions, do me a favor. There are some things, please help anybody out. If you see some, so I've got some folks online who posted some things. If you send me a message during the day, I promise I'm not just sitting around here doing nothing, waiting for your messages. I'm doing things. So if I'm not getting back to you, it's because I'm orchestrating all of this as best I can. So be patient, or ask somebody else. Like, you can ask other people here. If you can't find a link, post it in the chat. If you need something, ask somebody. I will get back to you as soon as I can. I am looking at numbers tonight to see who's doing what, and I'll actually send out a finalized list of kind of how the stipends and whatnot are going to go, as well as the books and resources. Try to have that ready by tomorrow. If you got any questions or or anything like that, some of you already know you're okay. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm going to try to actually sleep tonight if possible. And I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Thank you all.